Looking back now, I know I wasn't just a cemetery caretaker. I witnessed things most people would rather pretend never happened. I retired, but I still live right across from the cemetery gate. Some might say it's madness, that I should have moved, but the truth is, the cemetery never really let me go. It always finds a way to call me back. And that's the story I'm going to tell. My name is John Arnold Parker. I'm 62 years old, living in a small town called Hickory Creek, Indiana. I was born here and grew up on dirt roads. My life was simple. The son of a farmer and a homemaker, I learned early to value every penny. I worked in the fields, in small factories, and did odd jobs here and there. Around the age of 25, an opportunity came along that would change the course of my life completely. A family acquaintance mentioned an opening for a gatekeeper at the local cemetery. The pay wasn't high, but it was steady. For someone living off odd jobs, that was a blessing. At first, the idea of spending nights among tombstones didn't excite me, but it didn't scare me either. I was practical. Dead people don't hurt anyone, I thought. And so I started, believing I'd find quiet, expecting the cemetery to be nothing more than a silent place. Hickory Creek, though small, held its own stories. Every small town has legends, unresolved family secrets, broken promises. The cemetery, slightly removed from the center, surrounded by old trees and crumbling walls, was the subject of many whispered tales. People said they heard footsteps at night, saw lights flicker near old graves, or felt a shiver just passing by the gate after midnight. I never paid much attention. For a long time, the only things I encountered were withered flowers and stray cats looking for scraps. The job taught me discipline, but it demanded a price I didn't understand at first. Over the years, the loneliness of the role made me realize that silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it holds voices that shouldn't exist. When I started at the cemetery, I was only 25, young enough to be naive, old enough not to believe in ghost stories. The news of my new position spread quickly. Some congratulated me, others joked. "Good luck with the haunted graves, John," they laughed. I smiled back, but inside, I wondered if they were really joking. The cemetery entrance was imposing, not for beauty, but for the secrets it seemed to guard. Two rusty iron gates opened onto a gravel path that cut through the land. On one side, ancient graves with crooked headstones, inscriptions nearly erased by time. On the other, newer tombs, some mausoleums too grand for such a small town, as if certain families wanted to eternalize themselves in stone. The job seemed simple. Open the gates in the morning, close them at night, keep people out without permission, record burials, and maintain order during ceremonies. In practice, it was much more. Being a cemetery gatekeeper wasn't just watching the outside. It was confronting everything that lay within. And there was plenty within. The first week passed quietly. The silence, the rustling leaves, the chirping crickets. But slowly, I began to realize that working there was like living in a parallel world. While the town slept, I walked among crosses and withered flowers, lighting lanterns for dark passages, becoming accustomed to the sound of my own footsteps. And that's when the first unease began. One night, I closed the gates earlier than usual. The full moon bathed everything in a pale light that made the lantern almost unnecessary. Near one of the older graves, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. A candle was lit in the middle of a grave I had seen clean just hours before. No visitors had come that day. I blew out the candle, thinking it was a prank. But the next night, there it was again, in the exact same spot. The town's elders spoke of that section as haunted. People who died in strange ways, families that vanished without explanation, promises left unfulfilled. I had always considered these tales superstition, but from that candle onward, I realized something was off. Something beyond what my eyes could explain. Months passed, and the incidents began to accumulate. Footsteps behind me with no one there, voices whispering my name, the constant sensation of being watched, even when the grounds were empty. I told no one. After all, what kind of cemetery gatekeeper would be taken seriously if he claimed to hear the dead? And it was then I understood. My life would never be ordinary. The cemetery wasn't just my job. It was my burden, my mark, and my curse. The days became predictable, almost routine. I arrived early, prepared the office, recorded burials, and when night fell, locked the gates and kept watch. The silence, which once weighed on me, became a companion. But even in silence, shadows reside. Families would sometimes come to speak with me. Some requested that I watch over certain graves. Others wanted to make sure the flowers were fresh. But occasionally, strange people appeared, those who were neither visiting nor paying respect. I remember one elderly woman approaching near sunset, asking about a grave that wasn't in any records. Her voice was low, almost afraid to be heard. When I tried to help, she vanished among the rows of headstones, and I never saw her leave. Around that same time, I began to notice a change in myself. Sleep became short and restless. Whenever I closed my eyes, I dreamed of the cemetery corridors, endlessly stretching, each path growing larger and darker. Steps followed me in these dreams, and when I turned, no one was there. One night, the chapel bell tolled on its own. It was old, rusted, meant only for funerals. I sat in the chapel, coffee in hand, listening as the heavy, slow tolls echoed. I ran to the chapel. The rope hadn't moved, and yet the sound had just filled the night. It was in that moment I felt something I will never forget. I was not alone. I began to observe more, listen more. The more attention I gave, the more the cemetery seemed to respond.
As months went by, I could no longer see the cemetery as I once had. It was no longer just a workplace. Every step between the graves felt heavy with meaning. Every shadow seemed deliberate. I noticed details I had once ignored. Candles appeared inexplicably, always in the same area, near the oldest graves. The wind moves strangely, as if avoiding certain paths, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. And sometimes I heard my name whispered between the tombstones. John. No one was there, just the wind, the trees, the growing chill. At first I rationalized, maybe bats, maybe rustling leaves, maybe an animal. But the episodes repeated, and reason began to fail. The cemetery felt alive, not in a literal sense, but aware, conscious, waiting, demanding. One night near midnight the call intensified. The chapel bell, long silent and rusted, tolled on its own. Heavy, deliberate chimes that filled the night. I rose from my chair, heart racing, and approached. The rope didn't move, yet the sound reverberated through the grounds. It wasn't just the sound, it was intention. Each chime was a warning, a summons. I realized then I was no longer merely observing, I was being observed. The phenomena grew. Whispers became clearer, closer. I felt something following me as I walked among the old tombstones. Slow, heavy steps that stopped whenever I turned. Only silence remained. The air grew dense, heavy, filled with the scent of disturbed earth mixed with decaying flowers. One afternoon, a light rain fell as I organized burial records. A shadow appeared near a nearly forgotten grave, tall, indistinct, as if made of thick smoke. I felt its presence, studying me. When I looked up, it was gone, but the cold and the unease remained. I began to notice patterns. The phenomena always intensified after recent burials. The newly arrived spirits seemed to stir the older sleeping ones. The more I ignored it, the stronger it became. It was as if the cemetery was reminding me that my role went beyond gates and records. The nights became exhausting. I slept little, dreamt often, and the dreams were always of endless corridors and moving graves. Overlapping voices called to me. I woke in cold sweats, exhausted, yet the cemetery lingered in my mind. One night, I clearly heard my name again. John, John. The voice came from behind an old mausoleum, piercing the silence. I ran to the spot. Nothing. Just a fresh red rose lying on the ground. No family had been there that day. I realized I was part of a silent communication with the cemetery. It was no longer seeing or hearing, it was feeling. The ground responded to my fear, to my presence, to my resistance. And the more I tried to rationalize, the more the phenomena intensified. Occasionally, visitors came. Some came to tend graves. Others seemed different. One elderly woman appeared at dusk, asking about a grave that didn't exist. Her voice was barely audible. I looked around, and when I lifted my eyes, she had vanished. I was changing, not from fear or fatigue alone. The cemetery had seeped into me, a part of my daily life I couldn't escape. The initial fear became vigilance, and vigilance became a quiet obsession. One early morning after a burial, I stayed to close the gate. The wind howled, trees groaned, and then I heard it, a child crying, not an adult. I followed the sound through the forgotten graves. Each step took me further from the real world, and when I reached the place, only darkness greeted me, lit by my shaking lantern. Turning back, something grabbed my pant leg. Nothing was there, just a mark, as if invisible fingers had released it moments ago. I learned early, running only empowers fear. I remained steady, heart pounding, trying to comprehend the inexplicable. The next days were heavy. The cemetery was alert, every step I took echoing differently. Patterns emerged, candles always in the same spots, whispers around midnight, heightened activity after new burials. I mapped it mentally, like charting invisible territories. An old colleague had said once, "John, you're not just watching the cemetery, you're watching what's trapped inside it." I hadn't understood at the time. Now I did. Each night revealed that my role went far beyond anything I could have imagined. The cemetery didn't want protection, it demanded vigilance, and whether I liked it or not, I had accepted it. The feeling of being watched became constant. Even during the day, shadows lingered in my peripheral vision, something invisible but palpable. My body felt the weight of every unseen gaze, and I realized the cemetery was not just soil and stone, it was alive, and I was part of it, for better or worse.
Over time, the cemetery ceased to be just a workplace and became a constant presence, almost tangible, following me in every step. What began with whispers, lit candles, and sudden shadows evolved into a constant sense of urgency. It was as if the very ground wanted to tell me secrets that should never be revealed. One night, shortly after the burial of a young man who had died in an accident, something different happened. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the wind blew fiercely, ripping leaves from the trees and making the gate creak. I sat in the guardhouse, trying to convince myself it was only accumulated fatigue, but the silence felt heavier than ever. Then I heard it. 3 firm knocks on the iron gate, precisely 3, spaced apart like iron fists demanding passage. My heart raced. No one should have been there. I grabbed my flashlight and walked slowly toward the gate, each step echoing over the gravel. Outside, nothing. Just the empty road and the shadow of the trees cast by the moon. I held the padlock tightly, ready to lock it again. Instinctively, I asked, "Who's there?" No answer. Just the cold, mocking wind. I turned back toward the guardhouse, trying to convince myself it was only my tired mind. But before I could sit down, I heard something worse. Heavy footsteps among the tombstones. The gravel floor betrayed each movement, amplifying my silent panic. I turned on the flashlight and ran between the gravestones, trying to illuminate the darkness. The sound drew closer. Then, suddenly, silence. I spun in circles, but there was nothing. It was then that I heard the scraping of wood against stone. A harsh, dry sound coming from the oldest part of the cemetery. I followed the noise, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would tear through my chest. The flashlight revealed something that froze me. The lid of a tomb was slightly raised, as if something had tried to get out. I approached slowly. The earth near the grave moved, pushed by something inside it. My mind screamed to run, but my legs refused to obey. At that moment, I understood for the first time. It wasn't just about guarding gates and recording burials. My duty was to prevent the dead from escaping. I stood there, caught between the impulse to flee and the silent obligation that bound me to the cemetery. The earth continued to shift slowly, as if it were breathing. Then I heard the knocks on the gate again. Outside, someone or something demanded entry. Inside, the dead were trying to get out. My whole body felt like a rope about to snap. I took a deep breath, trying to gather courage, and shouted, "No one gets in here. I won't let you." The sound stopped for a few seconds, but soon overlapping voices, male and female, began echoing in pleading unison. "Open the gate! Open the gate!" I covered my ears, but the voices still pierced my mind, repeating endlessly. I staggered back to the guardhouse, grabbed the old rosary I kept in my pocket, and began to pray. It didn't matter if my faith was weak, it was all I had to fight this. The sounds inside the cemetery intensified. The dragging of coffins became the snapping of breaking wood. Tomb lids creaked, some falling heavily to the ground. The ground itself seemed to come alive. The wind spread dust, leaves, and that damp smell of disturbed earth. Then I saw the shadow trying to escape the grave again. This time, however, it had form. A human body, but not solid. It was a mass of darkness, dense smoke rising slowly. It fixed what seemed to be a gaze in my direction. My heart raced. I ran to the gate, pushing it with all my strength. The padlock held firm. Behind me, the noise increased, as if dozens of hands were trying to claw their way out of the ground. The only thing I could do was press myself against the cold iron and shout, "You won't get out. I won't allow it." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The sounds ceased. The wind calmed. The shadow dissipated like smoke blown away. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The cemetery didn't just want to scare me. It wanted to test me, to remind me that my duty went beyond what any mortal could comprehend. From that night on, I understood I would never have peace while I was there. Retirement would be impossible. The job wasn't about opening or closing gates. It was about holding back the dead, protecting the living, and living under the weight of a watch that never ended. In the following days, I tried to stay strong. The physical and mental exhaustion was unbearable. My body felt like it weighed tons. Sleeping became a challenge. Even during the day, I felt invisible eyes upon me. Other guards who had come before me went through the same thing. I discovered in the municipal archives records speaking of premature aging and inexplicably weakened health. The place did not forgive. Caring for the cemetery was more than a duty. It was a silent sentence, an eternal obligation.
The cemetery of Divanolandia had marked me, and I, even young at the time, already understood my life would never be normal. The weight of responsibility, the constant fear, the feeling of being watched, all of this would become part of me, impossible to abandon. And it was only the beginning. The night of the knocks showed me there was a delicate balance between the living and the dead, and my role was to maintain it, no matter the cost. Every candle, every whisper, every knock on the iron gate was a reminder. I was not just the cemetery's gatekeeper. I was the guardian of a world that does not bow to time, logic, or death.
Retirement seemed like the natural end to any job. For others, yes. For me, never. Even when I officially handed over the key to the guardhouse and the gate came under someone else's responsibility, something inside me knew my duty hadn't ended. The cemetery continued to call me, as if its presence were an invisible thread tied to my destiny. I chose to keep living across from the gate. Some called me crazy, others just eccentric. But the truth is simple. You don't walk away from a cemetery once it has made its home in you. The first nights at home seemed normal, but soon the signs began. First, the cold wind sweeping through the yard, even with all windows closed. Then the gate creaking, slow and persistent, as if someone were trying to push it gently. And, inevitably, the voices. Always the same, calling, whispering. Open the gate, open the gate. The neighbors started noticing too. Mrs. Celia spoke of figures crossing the street. Mr. Mark, more skeptical, mentioned heavy footsteps with no one in sight. But no one truly saw. No one truly understood. I knew. I felt. The body paid the price for years of vigilance. With every step the bones ached, nights were long, and sleep short and disturbed. In the mirror I saw deep marks of fatigue, wrinkles, dark shadows, and eyes tired from living more than they should. But the mind remained alert. I could not relax. I never could. Researching further, I found old records of the cemetery. Long before it became the municipal cemetery, the land had been a site of rituals and hurried burials. People left without blessing, stories abruptly cut, cursed to oblivion. I then understood that these were not just wandering souls. They were fragments of unresolved stories trapped between worlds, waiting for someone to keep them contained. And that someone was, inevitably, me. I accepted the reality, not by choice, but by destiny. Even retired, I remain the guardian. The knocks on the gate, the whispers, the shadows, all of it still follows me. And I know that when my time comes, there will be no ceremony or formal farewell. There will only be the gate slowly opening, and me crossing to the other side, fulfilling the role that was always mine. Today,
At 62 years old, life is reduced to this silent vigil. I walk slowly, body heavy, soul alert. The cemetery is not just work. It is a legacy. It is a curse. It is a constant reminder that no one truly retires from the cemetery. And that is why I say, the cemetery never let me go, and I never left the cemetery. The connection is eternal. The weight is real, and the vigilance is indispensable. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next terrifying accounts. And most importantly, share your own chilling stories in the comments. Who knows, your experience might be the next video.